Sometimes the world laughs hardest right before it discovers how wrong it is. The Saturday auction at Hayes Luxury Auto had drawn the usual crowd. Collectors in pressed jackets. Dealers carrying tablets. Investors looking for opportunities hidden among rows of polished metal and expensive paint. The front section displayed the cars everyone wanted to see. Exotic sports cars. Limited editions. Auction favorites. Near the far corner of the property, separated from the spotlight and attention, sat a weathered coupe covered in dust and fading paint. Most people barely glanced at it. Ethan Carter did. He arrived in an aging pickup truck with his 8-year-old daughter Sophie sitting beside him. The truck rattled slightly as they rolled through the gate. Sophie looked around at the luxury vehicles lined beneath bright banners. "Dad, those cars are beautiful." Ethan smiled. "Some of them are." They spent nearly an hour walking through the auction. Ethan rarely spoke. He observed. Looked closely. Read plaques. Studied details most people ignored. Sophie had learned long ago that her father paid attention differently than everyone else. While others looked at price tags, Ethan looked at history. While others admired appearances, Ethan searched for stories. Eventually they reached the forgotten coupe near the back fence. The paint was worn. The tires were flat. Rust appeared along the lower panels. A handwritten sign hung from the windshield. Minimum bid, $100. Sophie tilted her head. "Nobody wants that one." Ethan crouched beside the car and ran his hand lightly across the dusty fender. "Apparently not." Before Sophie could ask another question, a voice interrupted from behind them. Victoria Hayes approached with 2 customers. Elegant suit. Perfect posture. Confident smile. She owned the auction company and carried herself like someone accustomed to being right. When she noticed Ethan studying the neglected coupe, amusement appeared in her eyes. "You are not seriously considering that car, are you?" Several nearby customers overheard and slowed their pace. Ethan stood. "Maybe." Victoria laughed softly. "That thing barely qualifies as transportation." One of the customers chuckled. Another shook his head. "You would spend less money setting a $100 bill on fire." More laughter followed. Ethan did not react. He simply looked back at the vehicle. Victoria folded her arms. "For $100, I could find you something that actually runs." Sophie glanced at her father. "Waiting." Ethan smiled slightly. "I am not looking for something that runs." The answer confused everyone. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Then what exactly are you looking for?" Ethan studied the coupe for another moment. There was something unusual about it. Not obvious. Not enough to explain. Just a feeling. A detail buried beneath years of neglect. "I am not sure yet," he said. Minutes later, the auctioneer accepted his $100 bid. The crowd laughed again as Ethan signed the paperwork. Victoria watched him tow the forgotten car toward the exit. What she did not know was that 5 days later, people from across the racing world would be searching for that same vehicle. The old coupe arrived at Ethan Carter's small garage just before sunset. The building sat behind a modest 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, surrounded by mature oak trees and a chain-link fence that had seen better years. Sophie jumped out of the truck before the engine stopped and hurried toward the car. Up close, it looked even less impressive than it had at the auction. The paint had faded into several different shades. Dust covered every surface. One headlight was missing. The interior looked untouched for decades. Yet Ethan remained unusually quiet. He walked slowly around the vehicle, studying it from different angles. Sophie noticed immediately. "You see something, do you not?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Maybe." Together they spent the next hour gently washing away years of dirt. Ethan did not rush. He never rushed. The more dirt disappeared, the more questions appeared. The manufacturer badge on the front grille did not match the model listed on the auction paperwork. Several body panels appeared hand-fitted rather than factory-installed. Even stranger, small details seemed intentionally hidden. When Sophie cleaned the driver's side door, she paused. "Dad, look at this." Ethan walked over. Near the lower edge of the door frame, almost invisible beneath old paint, sat a series of tiny engraved numbers. Not stamped. Engraved by hand. He crouched closer. The sequence did not resemble a standard vehicle identification number. It was shorter. Simpler. Almost like a code. Ethan wrote it down in a notebook. "What does it mean?" Sophie asked. "I do not know." The answer seemed to satisfy her. She had learned long ago that uncertainty never bothered her father. After dinner, while Sophie worked on homework at the kitchen table, Ethan sat beside a laptop searching databases. Vehicle registries. Collector forums. Historical records. Nothing matched the number. Every search ended the same way. No results found. Midnight arrived. Ethan continued searching. The code simply did not exist. That bothered him more than finding an answer would have. Cars always left records. Titles changed hands. Registrations existed. Ownership history survived somewhere. But this vehicle seemed to have slipped through every system. The next morning, Ethan returned to the garage carrying a flashlight. While inspecting the rear section of the car, he discovered something else. Hidden beneath an access panel sat a second engraving. Different numbers. Same handwriting. His expression changed slightly. Two markings meant intention. Someone had wanted these codes to survive. Sophie appeared at the garage entrance holding a glass of orange juice. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Ethan looked at the strange sequence one more time before closing the panel. "Only enough to know this car is not what everybody thinks it is." Somewhere across town, people were already forgetting the neglected coupe sold for $100. Ethan was beginning to suspect that forgetting it might have been a very expensive mistake. By Monday afternoon, Ethan had stopped searching for answers and started searching for absences. The distinction mattered. Every vehicle left traces behind. Registration records. Insurance documents. Repair histories. Ownership transfers. Somewhere, a car's story always existed. Yet every path connected to the old coupe seemed to disappear into empty space. Sitting at a small desk in the corner of his garage, Ethan reviewed databases that reached back decades. The strange numbers he had discovered should have pointed somewhere. Instead, they led nowhere. Not incorrect records. Not incomplete records. Nothing at all. Sophie sat nearby reading a library book while occasionally glancing toward the computer screen. She had become curious too. "Maybe somebody erased it," she suggested. Ethan smiled slightly. "That would be difficult. But not impossible." He looked at her. "No. Not impossible." The answer lingered in the air longer than either expected. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited the county records office. The building had not changed much in 30 years. Beige walls. Metal filing cabinets. Employees who moved at a comfortable pace. He submitted the vehicle information and waited. 20 minutes later, an employee returned carrying a puzzled expression. "I have never seen anything quite like this," she admitted. Ethan remained quiet. The woman checked the paperwork again. "The system recognizes part of the record." She pointed toward her monitor. "But when it attempts to retrieve the ownership history, the file ends." "Ends?" Ethan asked. She nodded. As if the rest of it was removed. Driving home, Ethan replayed the conversation in his mind. Removed. The word bothered him. Records disappeared for many reasons. Floods. Fires. Administrative errors. But those situations usually left evidence behind. This felt different. That evening, after dinner, he returned to the garage carrying a flashlight and a small inspection mirror. The sun had already disappeared behind the trees. Shadows stretched across the concrete floor. Sophie watched from a folding chair while Ethan examined the vehicle more carefully than before. Near the rear wheel well, hidden beneath years of accumulated grime, he noticed a faint outline. Not damage. Not rust. Something beneath the paint itself. He cleaned the area slowly. Little by little, an old decal emerged. Most of it had faded away. Only fragments remained. A partial shape. A few letters. Nothing complete. Yet the design looked familiar. Ethan stepped back. His memory tugged at something distant. A magazine. An article. A photograph seen years ago. He could not place it. Not yet. Sophie walked closer and studied the faded marking. "Do you know what it is?" she asked. Ethan stared at the fragment for another moment. "No." Then he paused. "But I think somebody else might." For the first time since bringing the coupe home, he felt certain of one thing. The mystery was no longer getting smaller. It was getting bigger. Tuesday morning began with a photograph. Ethan spent most of the night searching through old racing magazines, archived websites, and collector forums. The faded decal hidden beneath the paint continued bothering him. He knew he had seen something similar before. The question was where. Shortly after sunrise, while Sophie ate cereal at the kitchen table, Ethan finally found it. The image appeared inside a scanned magazine article from nearly 30 years earlier. The photograph showed a race team standing beside several cars during a private test session. Most of the picture focused on the drivers. Ethan focused on something else. Parked in the background sat a vehicle with a partially visible decal that matched the fragment on his coupe. His pulse quickened slightly. Sophie noticed immediately. "You found something." Ethan turned the screen toward her. "Maybe." The article identified the team as Monroe Performance Development, a legendary racing operation that had disappeared decades earlier. What caught Ethan's attention was not the team itself. It was the caption beneath the image. Private prototype evaluation. No production release planned. He read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited a retired collector named Harold Bennett. Harold had spent 40 years buying, restoring, and documenting rare race cars. If anyone could recognize the decal, it would be him. The old collector studied the photograph through a magnifying glass for several minutes without speaking. Finally, he looked up. "Where did you get this?" Ethan explained. Harold leaned back in his chair. His expression had changed. "That is interesting." Ethan waited. Harold pointed toward the image. Most people would not recognize it. That logo was used for less than 6 months. Ethan felt the mystery growing larger again. What happened to the team? Harold shrugged. Officially? They moved on to other projects. Unofficially? Harold smiled faintly. Nobody knows. Before Ethan left, Harold gave him one final piece of advice. If your car truly came from that program, do not advertise it. Why not? Harold looked toward the photograph again. Because some people have spent years searching for things connected to that project. Driving home, Ethan remained quiet. The warning did not feel dramatic. It felt sincere. That evening, while examining the coupe again, he noticed something he had overlooked before. Hidden beneath the passenger seat was a small metal compartment. The latch had been painted over decades earlier and nearly blended into the frame. Carefully, he opened it. Inside sat a single folded photograph protected by a plastic sleeve. The image was faded with age. A race track. Several people standing together. And parked behind them, unmistakably, was the same car now sitting in Ethan's garage. Wednesday morning brought the first phone call. Ethan had barely finished his coffee when an unfamiliar number appeared on his screen. The caller introduced himself as Martin Cole, a private collector from Arizona. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to buying rare machines. "I heard you may have acquired an unusual coupe," he said. Ethan remained careful. He had not posted photographs publicly. He had not listed the vehicle anywhere. Yet somehow the information was spreading. "Who told you that?" Ethan asked. A brief silence followed. "People talk." The answer revealed nothing. After the call ended, 2 more followed before lunch. Then another. Each caller seemed interested in the same thing. Not the condition of the car. Not whether it ran. They wanted photographs of specific details. The engraved numbers. The faded decal. The hidden compartment. Ethan declined every request. Something about the sudden attention felt premature. That afternoon, Sophie arrived home from school carrying a small stack of library books. She found Ethan sitting beside the old photograph they had discovered inside the compartment. The image rested beneath a magnifying lamp on the workbench. "Did you find something new?" she asked. Ethan pointed toward the background of the picture. "Look here." Sophie leaned closer. At first she noticed only race cars and mechanics. Then she saw it. A banner hanging above one section of the track. Most of the lettering had faded, but a few words remained visible. "Monroe Invitational Testing Program." Sophie frowned. "Is that important?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Very." Until that moment, Monroe Performance Development had existed mostly as a mystery. Old articles. Rumors. Fragments of history. Now they had proof connecting the coupe directly to the organization. Later that evening, Ethan scanned the photograph and enlarged the image digitally. New details appeared. Team members. Equipment markings. Vehicle numbers. Then one face near the edge of the frame caught his attention. A young driver standing beside the coupe. The image quality was poor, but the features seemed familiar. Ethan opened several racing archives and compared photographs. 20 minutes later, he leaned back in his chair. The driver was not just any racer. It was Jack Monroe himself before he became one of the most celebrated names in motorsports history. The discovery changed everything. Across town, Victoria Hayes sat inside her office reviewing auction reports when one of her managers entered carrying a tablet. "You should probably see this," he said. Victoria looked down at the screen. Multiple collector forums were discussing a mysterious vehicle recently purchased from her auction. Some users were speculating that it might be connected to a forgotten Monroe prototype program. Victoria stared at the posts. Then she remembered the quiet single father towing away a $100 car while everyone laughed. For the first time since auction day, she felt a small sense of unease. Meanwhile, Ethan continued studying the photograph. Hidden in plain sight, another clue waited inside the image. And this one was about to make the mystery much larger than anyone imagined. Thursday morning began with a knock on Ethan's garage door. Not a phone call. Not an email. Someone had driven across 3 states just to speak with him in person. When Ethan opened the door, he found an older man standing beside a dark sedan. The visitor introduced himself as Leonard Graves, a historian who had spent decades documenting forgotten racing programs. His eyes immediately settled on the coupe. "May I see it?" he asked. Ethan nodded. For nearly 20 minutes, Leonard walked around the vehicle without speaking. He examined the body lines, the engraved numbers, the faded decal. Every detail seemed to confirm something he had suspected. Finally, he stopped beside the driver's door and exhaled slowly. "I never thought I would see one again." Sophie, sitting nearby with a sketchbook, looked up immediately. "One of what?" Leonard smiled. "A ghost." Ethan remained silent. Leonard pointed toward the car. "Most people believe Monroe Performance Development built production concepts. They did not. They built experimental prototypes. Cars designed to test ideas that were years ahead of their time." He paused before continuing. "Most were dismantled. Some disappeared. A few became legends." Ethan listened carefully. "And this one?" Leonard looked at the coupe for a long moment. "I think this may be the prototype everyone stopped looking for." The words settled heavily in the garage. Later that afternoon, Leonard reviewed the photograph Ethan had discovered inside the hidden compartment. His reaction was immediate. He enlarged one section of the image and pointed toward a small emblem attached near the rear quarter panel. "There." Ethan leaned closer. Leonard nodded. "That symbol was only used on one project." Sophie looked between them. "Which project?" Leonard smiled faintly. "Nobody knows its official name." The mystery seemed impossible to escape. Every answer created larger questions. By evening, collector forums across the country had become increasingly active. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed the coupe was a forgotten development vehicle. Others insisted it was merely an altered production model. A few claimed it never existed at all. Meanwhile, Victoria Hayes found herself reading every discussion. The comments bothered her more than she wanted to admit. The same vehicle she had mocked publicly was suddenly attracting attention from serious collectors, historians, and racing enthusiasts. For the first time, she began reviewing her own auction records. Something unusual appeared immediately. The car had arrived with incomplete documentation. Several ownership transfers were missing. More strangely, no reserve price had been requested. It was as if whoever consigned the vehicle had wanted it sold quickly and quietly. Back in the garage, Leonard prepared to leave. Before getting into his car, he turned toward Ethan. "You should know something." Ethan waited. Leonard's expression grew serious. "If my theory is correct, there is one person on Earth who can identify that vehicle with absolute certainty." Ethan already knew the answer before Leonard spoke the name. "Jack Monroe." Leonard nodded. "And if he hears about this car, he will come himself." Friday morning felt different. The mystery was no longer hidden inside a quiet garage. It had escaped into the world. Ethan noticed the change the moment he opened his email. Messages filled the screen. Collectors. Historians. Journalists. Racing enthusiasts. Some wanted interviews. Others wanted photographs. A few wanted to make offers immediately. Ethan ignored most of them. He was not interested in speculation. He wanted facts. Sophie sat across from him eating pancakes while he sorted through the messages. "Is everybody talking about the car now?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Looks that way." She smiled. That happened fast. It had happened faster than either of them expected. By noon, several major collector forums were discussing the vehicle. Enlarged copies of the old photograph had appeared online. Racing historians debated details. Former engineers shared memories. Every hour seemed to produce another theory. Some claimed the coupe had been part of a secret development project. Others believed it was a lost prototype that disappeared before public release. No one could agree on the complete story. Yet one detail kept appearing in every discussion. Jack Monroe. His name surfaced repeatedly. People remembered interviews, archived articles, old rumors, stories from retired mechanics. The deeper enthusiasts searched, the more frequently his name appeared beside references to an unfinished experimental program that supposedly vanished decades earlier. That afternoon, Ethan received another unexpected visitor. This time it was not a historian. It was a representative from a private museum. The man arrived carrying a portfolio and a business card. After examining the vehicle, he made an offer. $500,000. Sophie nearly dropped her lemonade when she heard the number. The representative explained that the museum would take possession immediately. Ethan listened politely, then declined. The visitor looked stunned. "You are turning down $500,000? Ethan simply nodded. Something still felt incomplete. The story was missing its final piece. After the representative left, Sophie looked at her father. Most people would have said yes. Ethan smiled slightly. Most people know more than I do right now. As evening approached, the attention only intensified. Television producers called. Collectors requested meetings. Several wealthy buyers submitted written offers without even seeing the vehicle in person. Across town, Victoria Hayes watched the situation unfold with growing disbelief. The forgotten coupe that had sold for $100 was now the most discussed vehicle in the collector community. She replayed the memory of auction day in her mind. The laughter. The jokes. The certainty. None of it felt very smart anymore. Meanwhile, several states away, a retired racing legend sat inside a quiet home office reviewing photographs that had just arrived on his screen. He studied the faded decal, the engraved numbers, the old photograph hidden beneath the seat. Then he slowly stood from his chair. For the first time in many years, Jack Monroe canceled every appointment on his calendar. An hour later, a private flight was scheduled. He was coming personally. Saturday morning transformed Ethan's quiet property into something that looked more like a private event than a family home. News had spread overnight that Jack Monroe was on his way. By sunrise, collectors, journalists, historians, and automotive enthusiasts had gathered along nearby roads hoping to witness what happened next. Ethan ignored most of the attention. He spent the morning helping Sophie organize her school supplies while the old coupe remained parked inside the garage. The contrast felt almost surreal. Outside, people debated the vehicle's importance. Inside, life remained simple. Shortly after noon, a black SUV entered the driveway. The crowd immediately fell silent. Cameras lowered. Conversation stopped. The vehicle came to a gentle stop near the garage. A moment later, Jack Monroe stepped out. Time had added gray hair and wrinkles, but the presence remained unmistakable. For decades, he had been one of the most respected names in motorsports. He looked toward the garage before speaking to anyone. Ethan walked forward and extended his hand. Jack shook it firmly. "Thank you for letting me see it." Ethan nodded. "Of course." Together they entered the garage. Sophie followed quietly. For several seconds, Jack simply stood in front of the coupe. His expression changed almost immediately. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind that comes from seeing something long believed lost. He walked slowly around the vehicle. He examined the faded decal, the engraved numbers, the body lines. Then he stopped beside the driver's side door and closed his eyes briefly. The garage remained silent. Finally, Jack smiled. "I never thought I would see this car again." Nobody spoke. Every person in the room understood the weight of those words. Jack looked toward Ethan. Do you know what you have? Ethan answered honestly. Not completely. Jack nodded. That makes sense. Almost nobody does. He reached into his jacket and removed an old photograph. The image showed a younger version of himself standing beside the exact same vehicle decades earlier. The room became perfectly still. There was no longer any doubt. The car was authentic. More than authentic. It was historic. Jack carefully placed the photograph beside the one Ethan had discovered hidden inside the compartment. The two images matched perfectly. Every detail aligned. Every question suddenly pointed toward the same conclusion. Outside, word spread through the crowd within minutes. Phones rang. Messages traveled across collector networks. Social media exploded with speculation. Meanwhile, inside the garage, Jack continued studying the coupe. Then he turned toward Ethan and spoke the sentence everyone would remember. This is not a forgotten car. He paused. This is the missing prototype that changed everything. The mystery was over. The truth had finally arrived. And now the entire collector world wanted to know what would happen next. The following morning, the crowd outside Ethan's property was larger than ever. News outlets had arrived before sunrise. Collectors stood behind temporary barriers. Enthusiasts traveled hundreds of miles hoping to witness the next chapter. Yet inside the garage, the atmosphere remained calm. Jack Monroe sat beside the coupe studying details he had not seen in decades. Sophie quietly colored pictures at a nearby workbench while Ethan listened as Jack explained the vehicle's history. It had never been intended for public release. It was a developmental prototype created to test ideas that later influenced an entire generation of racing technology. When the project ended, most records disappeared. Several vehicles were dismantled. Others vanished into private storage. This one simply disappeared. For more than 30 years, nobody knew where it had gone. By midday, representatives from museums, collectors, and private foundations had arrived with offers. Some reached 7 figures. Others exceeded them. Ethan listened politely and declined every proposal. The amount never seemed to interest him as much as the truth. Then Jack asked if they could speak privately. The two men stepped outside beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Jack looked toward the garage before speaking. I would like to buy it myself. Ethan remained silent. Jack smiled slightly. Not for a collection. Not for an investment. I want to preserve it properly. Then he named a number. $5 million. The word spread through the property almost instantly. Conversations stopped. Reporters stared. Collectors exchanged stunned looks. Even people accustomed to extraordinary valuation struggled to process it. Ethan looked back toward the garage where Sophie sat beside the car that everyone once ignored. 5 days earlier, nobody wanted it for $100. Now one of the most respected names in motorsports was offering $5 million. Ethan thought for a moment. Then he nodded. The agreement was reached with a handshake. No dramatic negotiations. No celebration. Just mutual respect. Later that afternoon, paperwork was completed and photographs were taken. Victoria Hayes arrived quietly near the end of the day. She stood beside Ethan for several seconds before speaking. I was wrong. Ethan looked at her and smiled politely. It happens. There was no anger in his voice. No desire for revenge. The moment passed peacefully. As evening approached, the crowd slowly disappeared. Reporters left. Collectors returned home. The excitement faded. Sophie climbed into the passenger seat of Ethan's pickup truck and looked out the window as they prepared to leave. Dad, how did everybody miss it? She asked. Ethan started the engine and glanced toward the garage one last time. Because they only saw what was on the surface. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. The truck rolled down the driveway and disappeared into the evening light. Behind them remained a legendary car and a story that would be discussed for years. Ahead of them remained something far more important. A future built not on luck, but on the ability to recognize value where everyone else saw nothing at all.